I know. I know.
Hi, guys.
I was.
Miriam. I don't know if anyone
there she
can
is.
hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Sometimes I have issues with people hearing me on Zoom. I guess we're still waiting for everyone else to join.
Yeah, I think so. John, do we have a few more people coming?
There are one or two more, so we could probably give them a couple more minutes and then just begin.
Who do we have here, John? Who's all, are we STR homeowners, people from the city? I don't recognize everyone here, I'm sorry.
So this group is strictly the management companies, so companies that manage short-term rentals within the city. So we've tried to focus our stakeholder groups to specific, makeups, so that we can get feedback from these different groups. So we're going to kind of dive into a little bit about the public outreach process and whatnot as we kick off. I think right now we've got 3 of you, and I see all of you there. And I'm trying
I was on a group chat with Deanna and Chevy and Jason, and I think they were also invited, but they're property owners.
We had a separate group. Mm-hmm. We separate, so our groups are permit holders, meaning they manage their properties individually. And yesterday we met with short-term rental neighbors or residents.
Okay.
And we have management companies, and tomorrow are like local community groups. So
got it. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get started, John. I know Eric has a time constraint, so.
Yeah, and I just looked and everybody is confirmed, so I can just do some quick items just to discuss before Eric takes over. Is that the meeting will be recorded, so it is part of the public record. So just be aware of that. I think since the group is so small, we ask you just to be muted until you're ready to speak. There will be opportunities to speak later in the through the meeting. We're going to do a brief presentation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Okay, great, John. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the City of Dana Point, welcome. I want to thank you all as stakeholders for your time today and time throughout this process that includes a number of different phases that we'll get into here in a few minutes. But on behalf of the city, myself, I want to say thank you, and on behalf of the subcommittee, I will mention I guess I didn't mention this. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm the vice chair of the city's planning commission and a member of this subcommittee. And before we begin, I want to introduce the rest of the subcommittee to everybody. And it sounds like most of you have met at one time or another. We have on the subcommittee Commissioner Roy Donor, Community Development Director Brenda Wisniewski, Senior Planner John Ciampa, and Community Development Manager Jeff Rossler. And I think John did mention, so we want to make sure you mute your microphones when others are speaking. Because we are a small group, once we get into the dialogue portion, this could be pretty much a free exchange of information, very similar to what we've done in the past couple of days. Yesterday's group was a lot larger, so it was more difficult to do that. We had to have hands raised, but I think today we can do it a little differently. And since it is a small group today, I'd love to have each one of you introduce yourself and just tell us what organization, management company, or how you're involved in short-term rentals. And I'll just call off your name as I see you on the screen here. So Jeff, if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jeff Perry, and my company is Vacation Concierge. And we've been managing properties between San Clemente and Laguna Beach since 2007. And the majority, I live here in Dana Point, so I'm also a resident, but the majority of our properties are also here in Dana Point, Capistrano Beach, Monarch Beach. And thank you for having me today. This, of course, affects where I live, and it also affects my livelihood. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Chris, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning or afternoon, Chris Miller here. I have a property on Beach Road, and I started Beach Road Realty years ago, and ended up taking on a couple other vacation rentals as things kind of progressed in that nature. And one was sold off, the other one the owner moved back into, and now I'm kind of just doing my own property. Because the city's put a moratorium, I guess you could just say, on the ordinance, I sort of backed off. And also having an ownership stake on Beach Road and living down there, growing up there, I sort of didn't really get too into vacation rentals, because it seems as if, honestly, some property owners don't like them next door to them. And if you want to sell property or get along harmoniously with your neighbors, whether it's right or wrong, they don't like you because you get that stigma. And so consequently, thus, at this point in time, I'm just doing my own property and that's it. But I might dwell back into it and expand again. I don't know. We'll see what happens. And it really depends on what the city does with this ordinance in the future.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Miriam, could you introduce yourself, unmute yourself, and tell us your name and we know your name, but.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miriam Repke. I am actually a property owner and property manager in Dana Point. So I started off by vacation renting my own property in Capo Beach. We purchased a small duplex in 2015. We were living on one side and renting the other. And then just by meeting other property owners back in 2016, when we were revisiting the short-term rental ordinance, a few of them had approached me about possibly managing their property, since I started off on Beach Road because I lived just up the hill from there. So I kind of grew organically from there. I was still working in corporate America, and then I turned this into a full-time business. So now I manage a couple properties down on Beach Road, and then I also manage some properties on Balboa Island in Newport Beach. So I've been, I'm approaching this as from the perspective of both a property owner, first and foremost, and a property manager. And I have been involved also with the city of Newport Beach and some of their initiatives with the short-term rental ordinance. So I'd be happy to share some insight from some of the things that they did there, and the positives that we've taken away from that, and some of the things that I feel like they didn't really handle well, and what we might want to do different here in Dana Point. So I'm happy to be a part of this group, and thank you for including me.
Great, thank you very much. And with that out of the way, I'm just going to kick it over to Brenda to talk a little bit about the history and the process that we're in now.
Yeah, I won't go over too much of the history, since many of you have already been part of this over the years, but we do have a brief PowerPoint that we wanted to go over with you all. So John, if you can go ahead and pull that up. I want to get everyone on the same page related to why we are where we are now. And basically, as some of you know, so the city had a ordinance that it had proposed back in 2016, but it was rescinded by the councils on the basis that there were as a referendum or a threat of referendum that was presented to the council. So although short-term rentals have been part of our community for a very long time, there still is a concern locally by some that they aren't compatible with our community. So nevertheless, the city is interested in creating an ordinance that ensures that we have regulations in place, and also coupled with the fact that we are required to have something on the books to address the Coastal Act requirements, and that the California Coastal Commission is looking at this type of use as it provides improved access to the coast. So in 2016, when that ordinance was rescinded, the council did allow existing short-term rental permits to continue, with the idea that we would come forward with the ordinance shortly thereafter. So now we're in 2020 and we're still working on it. So the next slide will show you what has happened since then. And so what happened is the city council formed a city council subcommittee, and that was comprised of 2 council members. And those members went out to the community, they spoke with the Coastal Commission, and they actually conducted 2 surveys. The most detailed and statistically valid survey was completed last year about this time, and the results of that are on the city's website. And then the next slide will show us where we are today. So as a result of our discussions with the Coastal Commission, trying to explain to them the conundrum that we are in of trying to create regulations that work for our community, but at the same time, we didn't want to create an ordinance that would then have a threat of referendum again. So what the Coastal Commission staff suggested is we develop what's called a pilot program. And that would be a program that would be kind of a testing the waters type of situation where for a 3-year period, we'd create a program that would be approved for a permitting process, a coastal permit process, and allow us to basically offer different types of permits potentially to the community and make refinements to that program as we go. But the idea being at the end of that 3 years, we would then formalize that program through the Coastal Commission. So the next slide will show that the council said is like, okay, this is a potential good idea. Let's go ahead and ask the Planning Commission to dig into the details. So that's where the Planning Commission is now. Since October, where our subcommittee has been looking at different regulations in other jurisdictions and have developed what we think to be a very comprehensive outreach program that is really trying to understand what our community is interested in, what our concerns are of the community, and then come back with a pilot program. So in the direction from council was to assess all types of short-term rentals as part of that pilot program. So not only traditional short-term rentals, but also homestays. And secondly, which is where we're at right now, is let's ensure that we build upon our program to ensure that we have strong enforcement tools to ensure that the potential impacts of these types of uses are remedied. So the next slide is basically going over the process that John's going to jump into now.
Thank you, Brenda. So essentially, with the council direction, the city decided that the best approach would be a 2-phased process. The first phase being looking at and considering modified regulations for the existing short-term rentals. So based on a lot of the community outreach as well as the surveys, those were primarily focused around parking, noise, and trash. So that's kind of our first effort, and the key elements of our discussion today are going to be focused on existing short-term rentals and what kind of modifications we can incorporate there to ensure that we are addressing the community concerns. Phase 2 is, as Brenda mentioned, the pilot program, the 3-year term for that. So that this phase would include additional public outreach, as well as the development and the consideration of short-term rentals in the city and what would be the parameters and regulations and best management practices for that. So all of that would be guided by the public outreach process. So the program would allow for this unique flexibility to establish and refine these regulations over time if necessary, without the burden of a code update in terms of going through the city as well as the Coastal Commission to refine that down, have something that the city and the community are feel like is acceptable in the community, and then move forward with a formal ordinance. So with that, I'll dive into the enforcement standards and some of the statistics that we have. So this is just kind of a visual map in terms of the distribution of short-term rentals through the city. We've got the different districts within the community. So we've got those identified here in the numbers, and then the dots are the short-term rentals. So as you can see, there's some key focused areas, obviously Beach Road. There's a good grouping in Capo Beach, as well as the Lantern District. And then in the northern section is Corniche community has a fair number here. It's represented by 1 dot, but I believe there's 30 plus of those particular short-term rentals up there. And then the blue line here is representation of the coastal zone. So that gives you just an indication in terms of where the coastal zone is in the city of Dana Point. The next is just is a pie chart, essentially illustrating the different districts and the volume of short-term rentals within that district to give you a good perception. With District 5, with the grouping of Capo Beach as well as Beach Road, it's a significant majority of the community, as well as followed by District 4. So, and then if you look at, districts 2 and 3, it's very small percentage of the community. So that gives you kind of an idea in terms of the spatial and volume of the short-term rentals in the community. This graph here is essentially looking at over the course of the, since 2016, not including 2020, gives you visual representation of, the number of short-term rentals over the years. And you can see the attrition rate due to not allowing any transfer of short-term rentals if it were to be sold, to a new owner. So as you can see, initially we started as high as 165 and now we're down to 142. However, I'm not sure if it's a change in the times or, the increased popularity of these online platforms, but the TOT collection has increased. And, at 2018, when it is at its highest point, and just a slight dip from 2020. So then next looking at is the annual enforcement cases. So we've got this grouped into 3 different types. First is advertising of a short-term rental without a permit. As you can see here on the graph, that is the largest groupings of nuisances associated with short-term rentals, followed by late in the payment of TOT, and then an actual nuisance at a permitted short-term rental. So one thing to keep in mind as we continue to go forward with this is that, whether the city moves forward with an ordinance to, allow short-term rentals anywhere or to not allow them anywhere, the advertising without a short-term rental permit is always something that's going to be part of code enforcement's duties and actions in terms of policing those unpermitted units. So next is looking at the enforcement cases. This is for 2020. So as you can see here, sorry, my box is blocking some of my view here. The city's received a total of 67 calls over the course of the year to the city's 24-hour hotline, which is from a third-party vendor. And as you can see here, 28 of the calls were for nuisances, of which code enforcement was able to respond. Of all the calls received, 4 citations were issued. And it should be important to note that of those 4 citations issued, it was only amongst 2 properties, and the other active 144 properties never received any violations in 2020. So with that, I'm going to move on to discussing the existing regulations as well as some of the proposed regulations for consideration based on, as Brenda mentioned, some of our research of other municipalities and their short-term rental regulations. And it should be noted that that analysis and research was for not only coastal communities, but also non-coastal communities. There's a webinar a few months ago, and it was focused on Palm Springs and some of their regulations. And so, there's a lot of great regulations out there. And so the city's, looking to all of those as possible opportunities. So with that, the first element of concern with the community based on feedback was parking. The current regulation for parking is one space per bedroom, along with a maximum of 2 spaces. However, that can be increased depending on site conditions by the director. Additional regulations for consideration that we're looking for your feedback on is designating a public nuisance if vehicles for guests or their visitors are parked on the street, as well as the property owner would be responsible to pay all parking penalties incurred by the renter, which is typical for any other code enforcement violation associated with the city. Next is noise regulations. So the current regulations require the owner to ensure that the tenants aren't creating any unreasonable noise disturbances or disorderly conduct. The next step to that would be to abate any issues, including contacting the tenant or law enforcement, followed by code enforcement. And then, in the extreme scenarios, evicting the tenant or any other methods deemed necessary. And then followed by The property owner or manager should take every effort necessary to prevent a recurrence within 24 hours. Additional regulations that the city's considering and would like your input on is that amplified sound should not be heard at any time of day at the property line, as well as any non-amplified noise such as laughing, talking, or acoustical music should not be heard at the property line between the hours of 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. The last key concern by the community is the trash. So our current trash regulations require the containers or trash cans to be only visible between the hours of 5 p.m. before trash day, followed by 8 a.m. the day following trash collection, and that the owner should provide sufficient trash collection. Additional regulations for consideration are that any units with 3 or more bedrooms should provide 2 90-gallon waste containers, and that it'd be considered a nuisance that if any trash containers are left out past the allowed period, or if there's trash that's placed or is left out that's not in the cans and just is around the property or on the street, that would be considered a violation and a nuisance. So with that, we're looking for your feedback, not only on these provisions, but anything else that you have experienced through any other cities, municipalities, or something that you incorporate into some of your requirements as part of the lease or any other regulations to ensure that these uses are being regulated as such in a residential neighborhood to be compatible and not result in any negative issues. So with that, our next steps is we have one final stakeholder meeting, which will be tomorrow with the community groups, as Brenda had mentioned earlier. We'll be briefing the Planning Commission at the next Planning Commission meeting, which will be on the 25th. So that'll be next Monday. And then a Planning Commission public workshop, which will be on February 22nd. And that will be COVID safe in that the meeting will be held in the planning in the city council chambers by the Planning Commission. However, it will be accessible via Microsoft Teams. So you'll be able to join and provide any comments necessary through a safe means. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric to go through a little Q&A to get some of your feedback.
Great, thanks, John. And just as a reminder, really what we are talking about today is the development and implementation of updated regulations relative to operation of the existing STRs in our community. And the goal is to really build upon what we've learned over the past few years of monitoring all the different issues, but the information that we've gleaned out of the conversations from each stakeholder group over the last what will ultimately be 4 different groups relative to these regulations, because as we move forward, regardless of what we end up with a note that we don't have a plan yet on what we're going to do, whether it's increase, decrease, allow, not allow, that all the different types of outcomes for the second phase are really going to be determined during that second phase of outreach efforts. And we really are just focusing on getting our regulations correct, getting them correct. So if you could just keep your comments and your commentary and your thoughts really focused in on what we talked about today, which are the regulations and some of the proposed ideas or changes that John mentioned. That would be great and be really helpful to kind of streamline and focus those efforts. So with that, I just would open it up to anybody who, after what you've heard, give us your initial thoughts. If there's anything that was mentioned, concerns or things that we didn't mention that you thought may be something we should be thinking about as well. And go ahead, Mary. No, please.
I wanted to give my feedback. So, I know that a lot of homeowners, like especially just on Airbnb, they don't use rental contracts. Property managers, we use rental contracts. I've always used a rental contract even as a homeowner. I think that helps. I have a 10-page litigious rental contract that I have people sign. Sometimes they even comment that, oh, we don't see this normally on Airbnb, But I think that helps, because even just by the time they've finished signing our contract, which is 10 pages long and notes everything regarding, no noise, partying, just our house rules and expectations, they already go into it knowing that, this owner, this property manager is mindful and is watching. So that's one thing that I feel will help. I don't know if this is possible to do just because of age discrimination, but the city of Newport Beach did also, they did kind of a straw vote on this about doing a minimum age requirement of 25. Just like if you're going to rent a car and you have to be 25, I don't see why you can't do this on a rental property. I personally will not rent to anybody under the age of 25. Honestly, I won't even rent to anyone under the age of 30. And even that, I am very careful and cautious about it. If it's a group of 30-year-olds who want to come and stay at one of my properties, I usually try to scare them off or really let them know the expectations, because, the last thing that I want to do is have a group of 30-year-olds come in to have a good time and drink and, be loud and disrupt my neighbors. So I tend to scare people off more than I accept. But I do think that if we could implement a minimum age requirement, that would be really helpful. I know sites like Airbnb, they're kind of a necessary evil, but they don't allow you to, age discriminate is what they call it. If I get a booking request from an 18-year-old, and this has happened before, where I used to turn them away and say, no, I'm sorry, we have a minimum age requirement of 25. I got contacted by Airbnb with them threatening to kick me off their platform because I was age discriminating. So maybe if there was something that came from the city where this was a city ordinance, then we would have a leg to stand on with these different platforms that are really inhibiting us from being able to, rent to the people that we want to rent to and not rent to the people that we don't want to rent to. I don't do instant book. That's another thing. I know a lot of property managers do instant book, and I get it. It's kind of hard not to do it. I'm a smaller management company. I know once you go big, instant book is kind of the nature of the beast. But what that means is you're not screening anybody. Anybody can just book your property. So that means the 18-year-old who's submitting their booking request for one of my properties that I usually decline gets to just book that house. So these are some of the things that I do that, I've been able to avoid complaints, and, my properties have been in good standing. But mind you, I'm small compared to larger property management companies who have, 50, 100, 300 plus homes. So for them, it might not be feasible to do things the way that I've been doing. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that. I can't, and I'll chime back in if I can think of anything else.
Great, thanks, Miriam. And I think Jeff, I saw your hand raised there. You want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah. Actually, I want to play off of what Miriam was saying and let her know kind of maybe some of the ways that we've addressed some of those issues, and maybe something that the city can also think about. Regarding the age, the age discrimination is difficult. We've eliminated, well, I shouldn't say eliminated. We've have a minimum, this is internally, we have a minimum 4-day minimum stay. I noticed that the city has a 2-day. That completely automatically eliminates the weekend partier. I don't even get requests for that. No one wants, if they want to pay for the 4 days, then I get a little more deep into it with what they're coming for and other things. But honestly, I think 2 days is not, I don't think that's sufficient. I think it needs to be at least 3. Like I said, mine that we rent for that do have a permit, we have 4-day where we can do that. Miriam, regarding the instant book, we've got about 20-ish properties now. And regarding the instant book and the terms and conditions and contracts, we also have, if they're going to book direct, yes, the contract is wonderful. What we've done, and I've had to rely on it, and VRBO and Airbnb have completely supported my position. What we've done is we've taken those same terms and conditions and we have included that in every inquiry. So if someone inquires on our property, I turn around and say, yes, we'd love to have you stay. But if you're going to stay, this assumes that you've downloaded and read my terms and conditions. and that you are familiar with that. If not, don't book with me. And so that eliminates the need for that extra step, to be able to get a signature. And it puts it right out there. And so even if, they can see what I'm going to rent it for, they can see all that information, and then they can still choose to book. Like I said, it's been great because we do get full support from both of those advertising companies, where we can put our properties out there, and they back us up. If we have something that's included, they've totally backed us. So I do want to talk about some of the fines and other issues when you're talking about if we have multiple issues. I have a couple questions about that. Does that mean multiple issues with the same guest? Is that multiple issues on the property? I think if we have somebody that's there for a week, and it's we maybe have 2 issues, the next 3 people that we might have there for 3 or 4 months, maybe no issues. I don't know if it should be property specific. I think it should be guest specific, and maybe consider that, because a lot of times the problem, whatever it is, goes away in a day or 2. Anyway.
Yeah. So I do have a question for you, or maybe even it's more of a thought experiment. As we look at these regulations, what would be a response we would give to the community about being a guest specific enforcement, and then how would we deal with bad operators if they get a reset on every guest?
Yeah, I guess that really would be a complaint. We use the word specific again, but it really would be, what is the complaint? I think a noise issue, I think, is definitely a guest issue. I think if the parking has already been reviewed by the city, and it has been approved, yes, you have 3 spaces, whatever it's been, and then you have problems with the parking, you've got 10 cars there. Let's figure out what's going on there. Do we have that guest is bringing in 800 people to come stay with them during the day, or has it been a repeat issue with multiple cars and they're always over parking? I think there needs I don't know. I don't know the perfect answer for that, but I think, to be fair to the owner, I think we really need, that might need to be looked at. But my next question actually falls in line with the enforcement of that. We really haven't had to deal with this, but with the enforcement, if I did have to evict somebody, what kind of support do I get from the local law enforcement for that? I don't know that they can legally do anything. That person, whether they've signed Miriam's contract, my contract, or it's a contract with Airbnb or VRBO, that is a legally binding contract, and they are legally there for a certain amount of time. So I have those same conditions. I have those things in my contract about you can't do noise and we'll kick you out and all of that. But I'd like to know what kind of local support that we're going to get.
So I actually, if I may, I've actually spoken with Ted Harris about this. And technically, anything that is 30 days or less falls under, a lodging establishment. And he did say that the sheriff's department should technically assist us with eviction if necessary. Anything that is 31 days or more would then fall under California tenancy laws.
Right.
So, but the caveat is, and when I spoke with Ted at the time, we were dealing with all of these riots, and the sheriff's department was kind of timid on trying to evict people. So, I think there does need to be a clear, I think there needs to be a conversation with the Orange County Sheriff's Department on assisting with evictions. I did want to comment, though, on a few things, Jeff, that you had mentioned. First of all, regarding the 4 nights, that would kill our business. Like for my own property, I'm a small 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, my own personal home. I often get weekend travelers, and not everybody has a 3-day weekend. The city of Newport Beach, they recently implemented a 3-night minimum. That has really impacted the rental revenue for the homeowner. So, I personally would be, would not recommend changing the 2-night minimum. I think that works. I think people who are coming to party are coming for 1 night. When I get booking requests for partiers that are trying to rent, a beach house on Beach Road, they're usually wanting 1 night. So I think part of that is screening. And then also, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disagree also on, you know, leaving this on a per guest basis. You know, at what point are we as property managers or are we as homeowners not going to take responsibility for all of the bad guests that we have? I mean, if we're just going to be leaving this on a per guest basis, well, you know, you can have one bad guest and then the next guest can also be a bad guest. And this is the reason why we have a problem and why our neighbors have a problem. So we need to take responsibility as property managers and as property owners. And I have no problem, you know, being okay with, you know, so many strikes and you get your permit revoked, because that is how confident I am in how I manage my property. So, you know,
Absolutely,
that's just how
yeah,
I
agree.
think. And honestly, you know, how else are you going to get rid of the bad players if you're not going to hold them accountable? Maybe it's not 3 strikes. Maybe it has to be, you know, I know with Newport Beach, they kind of all encompassed it, where it's like 3 strikes and you get a penalty, but they were like including trash and, you know, like certain things that just didn't seem fair. But I think if, you know, if there are 3 noise violations within a period of time, you know, like, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there, 6 months, a year, whatever. I think at that point, then, you know, it does need to be revisited and like, hey, if you're not being cognizant of the types of renters that you're bringing in, then, you know, you're kind of ruining this for the rest of us who
Definitely.
are, you know, like playing by the rules and really trying to screen our renters. So
Yeah,
that's just my thought on that.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I,
no, that's
you know,
good dialogue.
and
Let me interrupt for 1 second because I don't want to lose my train of thought on
yeah,
the dialogue, because I think it's good. And Jeff, if you could help me understand one thing as it relates to our current violation sort of protocol. If I have a neighbor who's got a gas, they're extremely loud, I call, let's say for the sake of this discussion, I call the hotline. The hotline reaches out to the operator. Is there a violation if the operator gets out there and solves that problem? Or is the violation automatic as soon as a complaint's justified?
yeah.
We
That's a
actually
good.
haven't had that be a case, Eric.
Okay.
So, but I would say it would be up to the discretion of the code officer. And I can't imagine a code officer or myself requiring the code officer to write a citation if it was handled by the manager, right? I mean, we're talking about good management and solving problems and issues. And I think we're here to be helpful and not just issuing out citations.
Right. Okay.
Maybe one
And
of the
I say-
requirements is that, you know, all of my neighbors of my vacation rentals all have my card. They know how to get a hold of me. And and it doesn't happen very often, but I will get a call every so often. And then I want to be notified first, you know, if something's going on, and then I can speak directly to my guest. And I'd say 95% of the time, you know, that solves the problem. You know, they just weren't aware, you know, and sometimes here, you know, people come from all over the world, and there's different expectations, there's different privacy issues. Sometimes they're just not aware of the codes. We do our best to inform them, like the 10 o'clock rule. You know, I've had, you know, that's probably the biggest one, you know, and I get a call, something's going on 11 o'clock. They're like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. And then it doesn't happen again. You know, so I think it's education with the guests. We have guidebooks. I'm sure Mary does too. You know, I mean, we try to
Yeah.
inform everybody.
Well, the one thing that Newport Beach did, again, I'm going to refer to this because I do think that there are some initiatives that they've taken that are really good that we should implement in Dana Point. First of all short-term rental owners were required to register on the City of Newport Beach website. They have to have a 24-hour emergency contact person that lives within, I think it was 25 miles of the property. So that is a requirement. Secondly, they have these postings that are now required that we have to put in the house. In fact, I even made it into a flyer that I leave neighbor policy, and it talks about, you know, these are the quiet hours, you know, trash, all of these different things. And Eric, I'm happy to send this to you. I have a copy of it, but this is mandatory and is required to be left in the house or somehow presented. So they're not requiring us to email it to all of our guests, but it has to be, so we've laminated it, we've put it right there so they can see. I mean, I have signs right there. You can't miss it. Quiet hours are 10 p.m. I mean, it sometimes you have to do that.
Right.
You have to have signs because not everybody is going to read the 10-page contract that you send them. So these are some of the things that they've done, which I think does make a difference. So I think that does help.
Yeah, and I know that we've got have updated a lot of the handouts that are on our website now, and Jeff and John and Brenda have been working on the good neighbor policy elements of that, and discussions we've had with the stakeholders who have STRs. You know, the majority of them do reach out to their neighbors. They are the ones that they request to be contacted if there's an issue. And you know, my experience, you know, I have an Airbnb unit in a different city. It is not a short term because the city doesn't allow short term. And I've had the guests that they read everything, but they break the rules. And you know, I have a relationship with my neighbors or past neighbors, and they call me, and I address it immediately, and it solves the problem. I think what I've heard so far is that, you know, as managers, you know, actively addressing issues immediately is critical. And I think, you know, from a policy standpoint and a regulation standpoint, that's where we're headed. My guess. But
do you think it's possible for us to do the age minimum? I feel like that's going to solve a lot of problems right there. Is it legally? Do we have the attorney on the call? Is that legally possible for us to do?
I don't know. I know it was discussed at one point, Brenda. Maybe you could chime in if you recall.
Yeah, it has not been reviewed by our city attorney's office, but I know it's very common for cities to have a minimum age requirement. So I think it's, from a staff point of view, I think it's something we would definitely forward on to the Planning Commission for consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the simple fact you can't get a car, you know, I don't believe these fall under fair housing laws. So, you know, the idea of discrimination, you know, breaking those federal laws doesn't come into play. And it may be a situation with Airbnb, but I would assume that if they understood that the platform would be unusable if they didn't allow for that type of screening, that they would allow for it, would be my assumption. But again, I don't know that.
One other thing too, which would be really good, is the city of Newport Beach got with both Airbnb and VRBO, and all properties that were in Newport Beach needed to register on their site. Otherwise, your listing was taken down. So that would be a way to completely eliminate this notion that there are 700 unpermitted short-term rentals on Airbnb and VRBO, which there aren't, but at least at that point, you know, that would just quiet that noise, because it would not be possible at all to have a listing in Dana Point unless it was registered with the STR number, with the STR permit number. So if you can get with Airbnb and VRBO, they did it with the city of Newport Beach. I'm sure it'd be easy enough to do it with the city of Dana Point.
Yeah, we'll definitely.
I was gonna say also, you know, we're really kind of only talking about one type of permit here. You know, I mean, the things that Mary and I use, you know, it's 24/7 available 12 months a year. I know that part of the pilot program is to actually offer 3 different types of permits. And so the age restriction, while Mary and I do actually kind of agree, ours is 21, but it's helpful that, you know, maybe someone who only has the hosting type of permit where it's more of a traditional Airbnb and they're sharing a part of their house, you know, maybe they want to host 18 and 20-year-olds. I don't know. But, you know, I think that would be something else to consider. Or I know the other permit that was talked about is like a house swap. I'm not sure how those would play into those various different types of permits. So I think I don't have the answer. I think that should be brought up in the discussion, though.
Is a house swap considered something that would be permissible? Like a permit? That's a house swap. I mean, there's no revenue.
Well, but there could be the idea that there could be a possible revenue. So I'm just saying we deal with mainly one type.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, given, you know, all the various things that we get to read, you know, I'm bringing it up. I just think that's something that needs to be considered.
Thank you.
So I'm sure you guys can tell I'm a stricter property manager. I'm like, no, 30, 30.
Chris, did you have?
I remember when this first started back in watching the Coastal Commission hearing online when it was this first ordinance with 2013 was accepted, and the Coastal Commission, it was about a 13-minute segment I watched, and they wanted one-night rentals, and I think the staff of Dana Point at the time was, hey, we have to have at least 2 nights, and that's where this ordinance was written from. Personally, I will agree with Jeff. The longer the better. The weekend warriors are troublesome, in my opinion.
Yes.
Unless you spend a lot of time like Miriam does to screen them. And I mean, she probably puts forth a whole lot of effort to make sure she doesn't have problems. And it takes a lot of effort to do that, because when you have people coming for just 2 nights, they're probably coming to celebrate something or another, and it's probably going to end up something, you know.
So I think Beach Road is different, though. I do agree that on Beach Road it's a different beast, but under our ordinance, under like all of us who are permitted, it's just not the waterfront homes. There are also the little cottages that people, business travelers will come to. So the market that I serve in my house is different than the market that my clients on Beach Road will serve. I typically will serve, like before COVID, business travelers during the week who were in town and they didn't want to stay in a hotel. So they would book my 2-bedroom, 1-bath or my 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they would stay there on a Monday or Tuesday. The 2-night bookings are, would really fill up my week. And same with some of the smaller properties on in Newport Beach, same thing. So, I think it's a different market when you're on a beachfront property versus some of the other homes that are in Dana Point that aren't necessarily just right on the water.
I will agree.
But it is a lot of work.
Do you own those homes? Do you own those homes, or are you representing the homes?
I own and I represent, so I'm both. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, because the ones I represent, my owners, I even had to talk the one into a 4-night minimum. All my owners, because of the use of the property and the types of guests that the guest profile that does come in, they didn't want anything less than a week. So it just depends on that as well. And you're right, then you end up with a different guest profile. It does change, but our occupancy has been very high. So we just got to decide, what do we want to do as a city?
I think the city has their hands tied to the Coastal Commission, because the prior time, the Coastal Commission wanted 1-night rentals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the city, when they're looking at this ordinance, is like, is this new possible pilot program going to be just to appease the Coastal Commission and only take place in the coastal zone of Dana Point, or is it going to be blanket wide for the entire city to unleash permits citywide for maybe a 3-year period? And it's, there's a balancing act of managing a property correctly, but also getting the Coastal Commission to endorse it, whatever the city does. And what the city gets endorsed by the Coastal Commission and the way things really end up playing out are 2 different things. Because obviously, you're doing 4 nights. I do, in my own place, I do 7 nights. I have a 1-week minimum. Let me know when you have the time to enjoy a full week at the beach with your family.
Right.
Call me.
I only have one that does 4. The rest of mine do 7+.
And it's like, and I had, a great year last year. And it's like, it's a tough thing, and it does, Miriam. I think you're right, because like you probably have like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath condo. Nobody's renting a little place. They want a place to stay for a weekend and to get outside and go to dinner and just do Dana Point activities. And that's a different thing than when somebody gets a big home, maybe a yard or a beachfront or something like that, where they're going to try to, if they're coming
make a vacation about it.
When they're coming for a couple nights with a huge beach or patio or yard, they're going to do something else with that big space, outdoor space. Mm-hmm. And that's, unlike maybe a 2-bedroom, 1-bath condo, they're not going to try to rent that for a weekend celebration without the exterior space to do it. And,
all of my 1s and 2s, they book for the months. I have all my snowbirds and sunbirds. I've got at least a 75% occupancy on the small ones and almost 100% occupancy during the summer months. And that's on my 2s and 1s, you know, so it just, like I said, it just depends on the guest profile that you attract, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if I were to rent my property by the month, I'm going to be, you know, significantly decreasing my revenue. I mean, I
Of
have
course.
my parents' property does not have a permit. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. What I rent for the month is a fraction of what I would rent my one that has the STR permit. So, you know,
course.
at the end of the day, we have to come up with something that's going to be fair and reasonable for all of us who have permits. And at the end, and personally, yeah, I get it. I think that the beachfront properties are a bit of a different beast, but, you know, I also think that somebody who's going to be renting a house for 2 nights on the beach versus 4 nights, if properly screened. I've been doing this on Beach Road since 2016. I haven't rented to one bad guest, and I have had 2-night renters there. But again, what I do is very labor intensive. You know, I'm calling and messaging with these people, and I get it that other property managers don't do that. So, but you know, we got to figure out a way to make this work for everyone.
I would say it's the other individual owners that don't do it. I think property manager has a vested interest in their business, and they would at least try. I know I do it, but I'm just saying, I think there most of those, and you know, Eric or somebody might have the stats on it. How many are individually owned and how many are managed by managers? And I would absolutely agree with you that we can't expect an individual owner to go to the same standards as if you have a business that you're trying to grow and protect. You know, so you know, that has to be considered. If we're trying to do a catch-all, you know, system here that's pretty tight, you know, we've got to think about all the profile owners.
Yep, I think that's a good comment. I do want to. I have to leave early, unfortunately, today, so Roy's going to step in. But I have a couple of questions I just want to throw out to you guys and see if anybody had any comments, and then also just encourage you to, as it relates to some of the other changes that were discussed today, like parking and trash. That you know, your thoughts on that. But as it relates to noise, you know, we were discussing with a couple different groups the inclusion of noise monitors, and want to know if any of you have had any experience using those in your operated units.
I've tried them twice. I found them to be somewhat faulty. They capture other noises that have nothing to do with my guests.
Yeah, I've heard
Gotcha.
the same. I've heard the same about that. They're not
Did you
very
get
reliable.
were there ones through Airbnb, or were they, you know?
No, it was a private companies or
okay.
privately
Yeah,
purchased.
I think the ones that Airbnb endorse are private, you know, enterprises.
No, they each have one. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I just have not found them to be totally useful.
I've never tried. I've never even tried one. I think, you know, keeping in close contact with your neighbors and being in good graces with the neighbors. And if there's an issue, they're going to tell you. I mean, you know, keeping tabs, you know, in like Beach Road, it makes it really easy because there's only one way in and one way out, and there's a guard at the gate. I get a text alert when there's a gate pass issue. I know exactly how many cars are coming in, when they're coming in. The electronic locks, I know when they open the door, when they close the door. You know, I've got neighbors that, you know, on one side that's really great. I got neighbors on the other side. Well, you know, that's a different story. But and that's not because of my rentals, because they've operated a vacation rental Dana Point without a permit for year after year, and they continue to do it. And you know, and that, you know, it's an unfortunate, that's a whole nother story. But I like the idea, Miriam, of what Newport Beach did. If you don't have a permit, you're not going to be on VRBO or Airbnb. You can't go on Airbnb and VRBO and say, oh, we do a 30-night minimum because we don't have a permit. But then you read the fine print at the bottom. They're call us, we'll do a 2-night rental, 3-night rental. You know, I got a property next door. I come out and there was a wedding there a month or so ago on Beach Road. Then I had some what looked like sorority girls, about 6 of them doing tequila shots and drinking games. And this is a house rents for $20,000 a week. City of Dana Point, I don't think they get a penny. I mean, I probably paid, you know, $25,000 in TOT last year on my property, I'm guessing. And this house should be paying about $40,000 a year. And the owner, for whatever reason, makes a unilateral choice of not getting a permit and operating under the radar as much as possible. And somehow, no matter how many times it comes around, he still does it. And there's that's what's going on. And it's like people are like, and that's why Newport Beach is like finally said, hey, great, you're just not going to advertise on these sites.
I think that's the smartest thing they've done. Like that was, it kind of sucked because I didn't realize, and I noticed some of my properties were hidden. I'm like, what happened?
Yeah.
So I realized that I had to register, and then they went back live. I freaked out there for a second, but yeah. So I know personally that they took down my listings until I put my STR permit number.
Right.
So yeah.
It's lost revenue to the city by letting them be on there and try to operate under the radar all the time. It's obviously the people that are doing that, these property owners that are doing that, are not following any of the rules. I mean, you can take all these papers and throw them out the window. They don't care. And they're the bad apples. And there's more than they're scattered. They're around us. And it's an unfortunate situation because there's the people that want to comply and do things the right way, and their heart and souls are into this. And like I thought a 5-page rental agreement I had was pretty lengthy with a lot of places to initial, but 10 pages, you just blew me away.
This is I'm going to tell you, this is our livelihood. When we can't afford this house. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. More than a property manager, more than my business, this house is my baby. When my husband and I bought it, he's still a student, he's still going to school. So we can't afford it unless we do this. And that's why I am so strict. And that's why I take the measures that I take, because I can't afford to have my neighbors complain or to have a bad reputation. And I don't want that for other property owners as well. That's why I've been involved since 2016. So.
Well, I wanted to say thank you. I'm going to step out, but I'll encourage you guys to keep on going, and really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you participate in our next open meeting, which is on February 22nd, and really appreciate your time today. And Roy, it's all yours, buddy.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I actually had a question for Chris and Miriam. We were talking about the noise products, and they don't work really great. I've got about a third of my products, homes, rentals, that have Ring, or a visual, component for privacy and security. And I've had several of my owners, when they put them up, kind of point them in the wrong direction. So I've had to have talks with them that you can't point them indoors, So do you have, well, they want to know who's coming and going, right? It's like, it turns, it's like, who are you? But that's
illegal. You can't do that.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah. I just want to get your input if you guys also have that, or what your experience has been with that. And
I have
it helpful. You do.
Yeah.
And
so I have it. I do. Yeah. I mean, I have it on my exterior of my property because I am the crazy strict property manager that I am. I don't even allow people to smoke on my property, not even on the patio. So, I'll look and I found them smoking on my patio, and then I'll call them. So, I mean, but outside of that, or if they're sneaking pets in your house, I don't these are the types of problems that I have, is people smoking, or they might sneak a dog into the house. But I think it is helpful to have the camera out there, because then they know they're being watched. So between a contract and a good neighbor policy, and a Ring camera outside, these are all signs. They start seeing. Now, if you don't have a rental contract, if you don't have a good neighbor policy in the house, there's no notation, there's no Ring camera, they're just like, oh, these are like absentee owners, they really don't care. So you have to set a precedent, and that's what I've noticed works.
Yeah, and actually in line with that, maybe something the city might want to consider is, here's the 10 things that we're expecting every guest to have. The good neighbor policy, not the Ring necessarily, but you have a series of these different documents, or these are the things that need to be posted, or in a guidebook or somewhere, that we're all being, whether you're an individual homeowner or you're a property manager, we're all consistent. And I think that might be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what Newport Beach required. They required
Yeah.
everybody to have, this was a requirement, just like your permit,
Yeah.
that you have to have these up in your property, and they gave a deadline. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that helps. And I made a little flyer out of it. I made a little flyer and we put it in a welcome basket. It says good neighbor policy. So they check it out and look at it. And then I have a sign too. So
Yeah.
you can miss it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's great.
Yeah, I think, beach roads, again, you've got one way in and one way out, and that guard gate has cameras. They can see the
Mhm.
license plates on the cars when they come in. Their pass has has a license plate on it. There's a video of the person coming in the gate when they're checking in. So you pretty much know when someone comes in and who's coming in and what car. It's recorded.
and also with the minimum parking spaces, they're not letting anyone in. So, good luck trying to have a raging party on Beach Road. But
Right.
I mean,
we represent one home there on Beach Road, and that was, it wasn't an issue per se, but it was definitely, they're like, well, we have a couple people coming in. I'm like, well, park outside the gate and go get them.
Yeah, I will say
I don't
that.
know what to tell you.
So, I have an exception for mine to have additional parking that was granted because I have the additional on-site parking. And, the reality is I think this ordinance was somewhat written for a condo development with, I think, a maximum of 2 cars for a vacation rental. Because the reality is when someone on Beach Road, for instance, grandma and grandpa are renting the house for 10 grand for the week to take their, maybe son and daughter and their grandkids to the beach. And well, grandma and grandpa have at least one car, and each the son and daughter, that's a car. There's 3 cars. Maybe one of the kids comes in they're of teenage driving years or older. And so you're going to have 4 cars or so. And so when you put a 2-car limit on a house, that's maybe a 4 or 5 bedroom house, and has the on-site parking, I think that's a little bit ridiculous, because what the city is doing with this ordinance that was written for condominiums, I believe, is forcing these people to park their cars in the Capstone Beach parking lot, where the community people that live in Capstone Beach cannot get parking because of this ordinance. And they're parking on PCH, same thing. So, this ordinance is actually, the parking is if there's enough on-site parking, I think the city should amend this to allow for it.
So Chris, I actually, because I have a couple properties on Beach Road that are 4+ bedrooms. And when I renewed my permit, I sent in a letter, explaining that there's additional parking spaces and requested the additional space, and it was granted.
Sure.
So I think as long as you can show that, hey, this house sleeps 12 people, how are 12 people supposed to fit in 2 cars? And these are the spaces that I have. I think it's getting approved, but I think it's for the smaller homes that maybe sleep 8, that they're being a little more strict, because 8 people would technically fit in 2 cars, right? So
right, I agree with you, but the way the ordinance is written, and like I did exactly the same. Like I said, I have the parking. I did it, got it's approved because I have the on-site parking. But the reality is, you can only do it when you renew your permit. You can or obtain it if you're able to obtain a permit. And the reality is that in the interim, are the people that are not doing it are saying, hey, just park down in the Capitol Beach parking lot, or park on PCH.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And all it's doing is taking away the community's parking, while a property owner has vacant parking sitting in their driveway.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're only 2 cars in through the guard gate on Beach Road for the house. And it's, just doesn't seem too reasonable.
Yeah, Chris, I want to speak to your point about the condo, and Roy, maybe make a note of this. Every condominium complex has restrictions and allocations of parking. For a 1-bedroom, you get 1 parking space. For a 2-bedroom, you get 2. You get 1 that's covered, 1 that's not. Every single condo complex where we have condos where we represent, we're already limited to a certain restriction in the first place. And so I think not necessarily the city's restrictions don't necessarily conflict, but I think they could. And so I think, to be honest, there might be some sort of caveat in there to just say, or follow what the condominium complex rules are, because I think to limit or to restrict somebody that Like I have a condo that has, oh, it's a 1 bedroom, but they have two spaces. And so they should be allowed to use those 2 spaces and not be restricted to the 1. You know, for example, according to this particular thing. So like Chris, you were saying, the 2 parking spaces are kind of written to a condo. Yeah, I agree with you. They're kind of, they feel like that. But we need to consider what the rules that are already set up for and not have to do double work here.
Right. And you know, and it's fine. Everybody that wants additional more than 2 needs to request for it at the time that we need a permit.
Yeah.
On a case-by-case basis. And that's just, I mean, that's fine. It just creates more work for the city. And I think perhaps, maybe not, but you know.
Yeah.
You know, and while the person's waiting for that date to come up, or the person that owns a property doesn't want to take the time to write the letter and make the request, you know, they're going to have their people just park somewhere else. So,
yeah.
I'm going to have to jump off here in about 10 minutes. So just heads up, I might have to leave you guys. Was there anything else, Roy, that you wanted to ask us?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that all of you are aware of the trade-offs. The city is trying to balance the needs of the residents and to protect the minority rights of property owners that need to generate some income from their properties. They also have the hotels that are a part of this consideration. So I think the property owners that are most successful are the ones that are very aware of their neighbors and have, as you have said, Jeff, and as you said, Miriam, given their cards, their phone numbers to the neighbors. So the quicker the reaction time, the less involvement we have with Jeff Rossler and his enforcement people. And I think the guests appreciate not seeing the police and talk to the owner. So we very much appreciate your input. And obviously we're really at the beginning of this process. We need to develop something that's going to be acceptable to the owners, the managers, the residents of the city. And that's what we're trying to do. And obviously, if it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. So we'll close off the meeting unless anybody has anything to say. And we thank you very much for your participation. And we hope you join us on the 22nd of February. So when we kind of recap all this.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. Bye-bye.